The divorce papers were already signed before the wedding cake was cut. Nadia found out at 11:47 in the morning, standing in a borrowed dress that was 2 sizes too big at the waist, reading a text message that wasn't meant for her. It had come through on her fiancé's phone, which he'd left unlocked on the bathroom counter while he went to greet guests downstairs. She hadn't meant to look. The screen had lit up on its own. "Tell him you love him today. Make it convincing." The transfer happens Monday. She read it 3 times. Then she set the phone face down exactly where she'd found it, walked to the mirror, and stared at her own reflection for a long moment. At the borrowed dress, the hair she'd done herself because they couldn't afford a stylist, the earrings she'd borrowed from her landlady. She looked like someone trying very hard to look like something she wasn't. She went downstairs and smiled at everyone who needed to be smiled at. That was the thing about being poor your whole life. You got very good at performing. The reception hall was a rented function room above a Vietnamese restaurant on Bloor Street. It smelled like faux and industrial carpet cleaner and someone's grandmother's gardenia perfume. Nadia had booked it 8 months ago, had paid the deposit in 3 separate installments, had argued with the coordinator over the tablecloth colors because the cream was cheaper than the ivory and she needed to save $30 wherever she could. She stood at the entrance and watched the room fill up with people who'd come to watch her get married, and she thought, I should leave. She didn't leave. She walked to the bar, a folding table covered with the same cream tablecloth, poured herself a glass of water and did the math in her head, the way she always did math when she was frightened. Total cost of the venue, $420. Deposit she'd lose if she walked out, $160. Cost of the dress rental, $90. Food she'd paid up front. The catering company didn't do refunds. She was going to lose a lot of money today, regardless of what she did next. That calculation made her feel, strangely, a little calmer. Her name was Nadia Koef. She was 29 years old. She'd been keeping her own books since she was 14. First for her mother's cleaning business, then for the restaurant where she'd waitressed through college, then for 3 different small businesses that had all closed within 2 years of hiring her. Not because of her, but the owners always seemed surprised by that. She was good with numbers. Numbers didn't lie to you. Numbers didn't send texts to other people at 11:47 in the morning. She was still standing at the bar when the main doors at the back of the room opened. She assumed it was more guests. She didn't turn around. Then she felt it, a shift in the room, the way a crowd shifts when something unexpected walks through the door. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they thinned. The air changed. She turned around. There were 4 men. 3 of them stood near the door, big and quiet, wearing dark suits that fit too well for this part of Bloor Street. The 4th walked ahead of them. He was taller than the others, and older, somewhere in his 40s, with grey at his temples, and a face that looked like it had been arranged rather than grown, all clean angles and controlled stillness. He was wearing a charcoal suit. No tie, 1 button open at the collar. He was looking directly at her. Nadia looked behind her to see if there was someone more interesting standing there. There wasn't. She looked back at him. He walked toward her with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never, in his entire life, been asked to wait. "Messieurs Kuiv," he said. She set her water glass down. "I don't know you. No." He didn't seem bothered by that. "My name is Strand. I have some business with your fiancé. I apologize for the timing." "His name is Damon," she said, because she felt, for some reason, that it mattered to name him. "Damon Holt." Something shifted in Strand's expression. Not much. Barely anything. But she'd spent her whole life reading the small movements people made when they were trying not to react, and she caught it. "Yes," he said. "I know." She studied him for a moment. He let her. "How do you know my name?" she asked. "I know a great deal about you, Miss Kuef." He glanced once around the room. A quick, precise survey, like a man counting exits. "I know you've been doing the bookkeeping for Holt's import business for the past 14 months. I know you do it on a freelance basis, that you bill him $60 an hour, and that you've noticed 3 separate discrepancies in his accounts that he told you were rounding errors." Her heart did something complicated. They weren't rounding errors, Strand said. She already knew that. She'd known it for about 6 weeks, the way you know something before you're willing to put words to it. The numbers had been off in a specific direction, a consistent direction, the kind of consistent that doesn't happen by accident. She'd told herself she was imagining it. She'd told herself she'd look more carefully after the wedding, when things settled down. "Where is he?" she asked, currently speaking to a man named Eckhart near the coat check. Strand's voice was even. "Eckhart works for me. They are discussing a debt your fiancé owes that became due last Thursday." She processed that. "How much?" he told her. She picked up her Waterglöckchen because she needed something to do with her hands. The number was not a surprise. That was the part that was a surprise. That the number wasn't a surprise. She'd seen enough ghost entries in those books to have estimated something in that range without ever letting herself think the word estimate. "He was going to pay it with the money from the joint account," she said. She wasn't asking. "The joint account you opened together 3 months ago. Yes, which I contributed to 40% of the balance," Strand said. "Yes." She looked at the cream tablecloth. She thought about the $30 she'd saved on the color. "So the wedding," she said, "was a mechanism," he said carefully. "I'm sorry." She didn't cry. She noticed that about herself, that she didn't cry. She felt something hard and cold settle into the place where the grief should have been, and she thought, "Later." "You can do that later, not here." "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because," Strand said, "I have a proposal." She looked at him. "Not that kind," he said, and she thought she saw something flicker briefly in his expression. The ghost of a person who might, in different circumstances, have found that mildly amusing. "A business proposal. I have a problem that requires a specific skill set, and based on your work history, you have that skill set. You want me to do your books. I want you to audit a set of accounts that I believe have been falsified, identify where the money went, and document it in a format that my legal team can use." He paused. "It would take approximately 6 months. You would be paid for your time. You would be working from my office, under contract, with full confidentiality protections." Nadia thought about the apartment she shared with a rotating cast of roommates in Etobicoke. She thought about the freelance clients who paid late, who disputed invoices, who asked her to just simplify things in ways she could never agree to. She thought about Damon, about the text message, about the dress, about 8 months of deposits paid in 3 installments. "What kind of accounts?" she asked. "The kind that are better discussed somewhere other than here." He glanced toward the coat check. "Your fiancé is about to come back into this room. I suggest you make a decision." She looked at the doors. She looked at Strand. She picked up her bag from underneath the bar table. It was a small bag, a clutch she'd borrowed from the same landlady as the earrings. Inside it she had her phone, her transit card, and $43 in cash. "I'll need to change first," she said. The corner of his mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. "There's a car waiting outside." The car was a black Suburban with tinted windows, which was exactly what she would have predicted, and a driver who didn't make eye contact, which she also would have predicted. What she hadn't predicted was the folder that was sitting on the back seat when she got in, a plain manila envelope, sealed, with her name printed on the front in a clean, precise hand. She looked at it for a long moment before she opened it. Inside was a contract. 12 pages. She read every word. She read it the way she read everything, slowly, twice, with a pencil she found in her bag from God knows when, marking anything that needed clarification. There were 4 things that needed clarification. When Strand got into the car, he sat in the front, beside the driver. She noted that, she said, "Page 3, Clause 6. The confidentiality provision is written to cover my entire professional history, not just this engagement. I won't sign that." A pause. Noted, Page 7, the payment schedule. "I want 50% up front, not the standard third." Another pause, slightly longer. 50 is aggressive. "You're asking me to leave my wedding," Nadia said. 50% up front." A beat. "Agreed," he said. She moved on. Page 9, the termination clause. "If you terminate early for any reason other than misconduct, I keep everything I've been paid to that point, plus a 20% penalty. This pause was longer. She watched the back of his head, the way he was very still. "That's not standard," he said. "Neither is recruiting someone from their own wedding." She heard something then, not a laugh exactly, a sound that could have been the beginning of one, cut off before it fully formed. "Done," he said, "and page 11. I want it in writing that my access to the original documents is unrestricted. I'm not working from copies that can be edited." "Agreed." She set the contract on her knee, uncapped the pencil, and wrote her 4 amendments in the margins. Then she signed it. "Do you have a pen?" she asked. He passed one back over the seat, a good pen, heavy, the kind that wrote smoothly without pressing down. She noticed that. She initialed the changes and signed again at the bottom. "You read very fast," he said. "I've been reading contracts since I was 22, she said. "Most people don't. That's how they get into trouble." The car moved north through Toronto traffic. She looked out the window at the October streets, the leaves coming down on Spadina, a woman walking a dog that was wearing a small orange jacket, a man standing outside a coffee shop who wasn't doing anything in particular. "The accounts," she said. "Whose are they?" "A holding company. There are 7 subsidiaries and approximately 4 years of records." "What am I looking for specifically?" "I'll show you when we arrive." "Where are we arriving?" "My office. Where is your office?" A pause. "Rosedale." Of course it was. She looked back out the window. She thought about the text message. "Tell him you love him today. Make it convincing." She thought about the way Damon had smiled at her this morning over coffee, the easy, familiar way he smiled, and how she had not, until this exact moment, understood that the smile had been a performance. She was furious. She noted that too, filed it away. Later. You can do that later. The house in Rosedale was not what she expected, which annoyed her because she'd thought she knew what to expect. She'd assumed something that looked like money, all glass and clean lines, the kind of house that announced itself. Instead it was old brick, 3 stories, the kind of house that had been standing since before the First World War, and had been repaired so many times it had become something different from what it started as without ever being replaced. There were trees in the front yard that were older than she was. The gate was iron, not the decorative kind. Inside was quieter than she expected. There were people. She saw them, moving through hallways with purpose, but nobody spoke to her as Strand led her through a set of double doors and into what was clearly a working office. Not a showpiece. Not the kind of room you brought people into to impress them. A room where actual work got done, with an actual desk covered in actual paper. He showed her to a smaller desk against the far wall. There was a computer on it, already on. "The files are on the server," he said. "Local access only, no external connections. If you need to print, use the machine in the corner." He paused. "I'll have someone bring you coffee." "I drink tea," she said, not because it mattered, but because she was tired of the day and it was the one small correction she had available to her. "Tea," he said, like he was noting it. He left. She sat down. She looked at the screen. She opened the first file. By the 3rd day, she had a problem. She'd expected the books to be bad. They were worse than that. Whoever had been managing the accounts for the holding company, a numbered corporation with an address in Mississauga, that she was already fairly certain was a shell, had been clever. Not brilliant, but clever. The kind of clever that knows what auditors look for and has gone to the trouble of avoiding all the obvious indicators. The money wasn't missing in large amounts. It was gone in small pieces, dispersed across 17 different line items, hidden inside legitimate transactions the way a pill gets hidden inside food. The problem was that some of those transactions connected to something she hadn't been told to look for. She sat with that for an hour before she mentioned it. Strand came in around 4 in the afternoon. He kept odd hours. She'd noticed in at strange times, available at others, never quite predictable, and she said without looking up from her screen, "There's a secondary issue." He stopped walking. "Secondary to what?" he said. "Secondary to the falsification you hired me to find." She turned in her chair to face him. "Some of the legitimate transactions that were used as cover, they're not clean either. They're connected to a set of payments that go back 2 years, and that I don't believe you know about." The room was very quiet. "Show me," he said. She turned back to the screen, pulled up the sequence she'd traced, and walked him through it. She did this the way she always explained numbers to people who weren't expecting them. Clearly, without condescension, starting from the simplest visible fact and building outward. She was good at this. Her old boss at the restaurant had once told her she was the only bookkeeper he'd ever had who could explain an error without making the person feel stupid. Strand stood beside her desk and listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a long silence. "When did you find this?" he said. "Yesterday evening. I wanted to be certain before I said anything. Why didn't you say anything yesterday evening? Because I wasn't certain yet." He looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "How certain are you now?" "Certain enough." She met his eyes. "This is someone inside your organization, Strand. Not someone who was given access to these accounts from outside. The way these transactions are structured. Whoever did this understood your internal approval processes. They knew what would pass review." Another silence. "Longer, I know," he said. She blinked. "You knew?" "I suspected." He pulled out the chair across from her desk and sat down in it, which surprised her. She hadn't seen him sit in 3 days. He always seemed to be in motion. "I hired you because I needed confirmation from someone who had no existing relationship with anyone in this building." She processed that. "So I was always going to find this," she said. "That's what you were actually looking for." "Yes." She thought about the contract, the amended contract, with her 4 corrections, which he'd agreed to without much argument. She thought about 50% up front, which had arrived in her account the following morning. She thought about the termination clause. "If I'm the person who documents this," she said slowly, "and whoever did this finds out what I've found." "They won't," he said. "You can't guarantee that." "No," he said, "I can't." He held her gaze. "That's why the contract has a security provision on page 8 that you didn't ask me about." She had read page 8. The security provision had seemed like standard boilerplate. She thought about it now with fresh eyes. "The accommodation clause," she said. "You would stay here for the duration of the engagement," he said. "It was always going to be safer. I didn't raise it on the first day because I thought it would frighten you off. Would staying here be voluntary?" "Yes," he said. "Everything in our arrangement is voluntary. You've negotiated enough of it to know I honor agreements." She thought about the apartment in Etobicoke. 3 roommates, one of whom was Damon's cousin, who would probably already know that the wedding had not happened. She thought about the questions she'd have to answer. She thought about her landlady, who would want the earrings back. "The accommodation," she said. "Would I have my own space? You'd have a room on the 2nd floor. There's a bathroom attached. I'd need my laptop. We can arrange that. And my books. I have 3 boxes at my apartment, also arrangeable." She turned back to the screen. The numbers were still there, patiently waiting. 7 subsidiaries, 4 years, and a thread she'd been pulling at for 3 days that led somewhere she didn't think either of them was going to enjoy arriving at. "I'm going to need 6 weeks to document this properly," she said. "Not 6 months. 6 weeks. It's complicated, but it's not that complicated. Whoever did this was clever, but they weren't patient. They left traces. 6 weeks," he said. "If you want it done in a format your legal team can actually use, yes, and after 6 weeks." She shrugged. "After 6 weeks I go home." He looked at her for a moment. "To Etobicoke, presumably, to a 1-bedroom you share with 3 other people, one of whom is the cousin of a man who was using your bookkeeping skills to hide money and your bank account to launder it." She was quiet. "That text message he received," Strand said. "The one this morning. The person who sent it works for the same group that's connected to the payments you found in those accounts. Your fiancé wasn't just a debtor, Miss Kuev. He was an intermediary." The cold thing in her chest settled in a little further. "So I was connected to all of this," she said. "By existing, by doing his books, by opening a joint account, by living at an address associated with his name." He paused. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because you strike me as someone who prefers to know." She looked at him. "I do prefer to know," she said. I thought so. She turned back to the screen. 6 weeks, she said. I'll need to work evenings. The office is yours whenever you need it. She pulled the first folder back into her sightline and got back to work. It became a routine, the way things do. She was up by 6, in the office by 7, working through the sequence of transactions with the slow, careful patience of someone dismantling a very intricate mechanism that might be rigged. She took her tea black. She ate lunch at her desk. In the evenings, she walked the perimeter of the property. Strand's men were always somewhere nearby, discreet, present, without being intrusive, and tried to put the numbers out of her head for an hour. She didn't always succeed. Strand moved through the house the way a weather system moves. You knew when he was around before you saw him. Something in the air pressure shifted. He was in the office most days, though not always working on what she was working on. He had other people in and out, other conversations, other problems she wasn't privy to and didn't ask about. He didn't ask about her work unless she brought it to him. When she brought it to him, he listened without interrupting. On the 9th day, she asked him a question she'd been turning over since the first day. The person who falsified these accounts, she said, how long have they worked for you? He was standing at the window that overlooked the back garden. 11 years. She thought about that. That's a long time. Yes, long enough to know everything about how your approval process works. Yes, so they knew what they could get away with. He didn't answer immediately. They knew what I trusted them with, he said finally. She looked down at her keyboard. The numbers on the screen hadn't changed. I'm sorry, she said. She didn't say it the way people say it reflexively, to fill space. She meant it. He turned from the window and looked at her. Something crossed his face that she couldn't quite categorize. Something old and tired. The expression of a person who had been sitting with a specific disappointment for long enough that it had become structural. People in my position, he said, are told not to trust anyone. Do you? Less than I used to. He looked at her for a moment. You amended my contract before you'd been in this house 20 minutes. That was professional practice, not distrust. Is there a difference? She thought about it. Professional practice assumes nothing about the person's intentions. It just accounts for the possibility of misalignment. He tilted his head slightly. And distrust is personal, she said. It means you've already decided. He looked at her for another moment. You're quite precise, he said. Numbers require precision, she said. Eventually it bleeds into everything else. He almost smiled. She was becoming better at reading the almost smiles, the small reorganization of his expression that never fully arrived. She'd started noting them the way she noted anomalies in a ledger. Not drawing conclusions yet, just marking that something was there. 3 weeks in, she found the origin. She'd been expecting it to be someone in finance, someone with direct account access, someone whose name appeared regularly in the approval chain. Instead, the trail ended with a woman named Selby, who ran Strand's logistics operations and had, as far as Nadia could tell from 4 years of records, been systematically redirecting freight invoices to a separate entity that paid her a consulting fee for the referral. It was elegant, in a horrible way. The kind of thing that only became visible from outside, because from inside it looked like normal business-to-business transactions. She brought it to Strand at 11 at night. He'd been in his office. She'd seen the light under the door and she knocked and waited, because she'd learned he liked to be asked. He opened the door, and she came in and sat down across from his desk and laid the documentation in front of him. He read it. All of it. He was a fast reader. When he finished, he sat for a long time without speaking. Selby, he said. Not a question. Yes. He was quiet again. The silence had a different quality from the other silences she'd encountered in this house. It was denser, like something being compressed. She's been with me for 8 years, he said. I know. She'd cross-referenced the employment records. Schism started in the 4th year, not the 1st. She built trust first. He looked at the documents. She had a daughter 3 years ago, he said. It wasn't relevant to the numbers. He said it like it was relevant to something else. Nadia thought about Selby, whom she'd never met, whose life she'd dismantled across 17 binders and a spreadsheet with 432 rows. "I know," she said again, quietly. He looked up at her. "You found that too. The maternity leave period shows up in the records. I noticed the timing of when the transfers increased. After she came back," she paused. "I don't think that excuses it, but I thought you should know the context." He was very still. "Why?" he said. "Why does it matter to you that I know the context?" She thought about it. "Because numbers don't tell the whole story," she said. "They tell what happened, not why. And I think—" She stopped. "I think you're the kind of person who would want to know why, even when you'd rather not." The room was quiet. He looked at her across the desk, and she held the look the way you hold a line in a current, not fighting it, not giving in, just staying. "You have 3 more weeks on the contract," he said. "Yes, the documentation will be ready in 3 weeks. Everything your legal team needs, yes." He nodded. He looked back down at the papers. She got up and left him to it. The last week of the contract she barely slept. Not because she was frightened, because the work was almost done, and she couldn't let herself stop until it was finished. That was how she'd always been, ever since she was 14, keeping her mother's books in a spiral notebook at the kitchen table, adding and re-adding columns until the numbers came out even. There was something about a finished set of accounts that felt like the only truly completable thing she knew how to do. Everything else in her life was ongoing. The books could be closed. She closed them on a Tuesday. She put everything in order, indexed, tabbed, cross-referenced, with a 3-page summary at the front and a 30-page appendix of source documents at the back. She printed 2 copies. She put them in folders and left them on Strand's desk at 7 in the morning, with a note that said only, "Complete, NK." Then she went back to her room and lay down on top of the bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about what came next. What came next was Etobicoke. Or not Etobicoke. She couldn't go back there, she knew that. Strand had been right about the address. She'd have to find somewhere else. Her savings would cover first and last somewhere, not in Toronto proper, maybe Scarborough, maybe Hamilton. She'd have to find new clients. Not through Damon's network. Anything connected to Damon was now a problem she couldn't afford to inherit. She'd start again, the way she'd always started again, with a spreadsheet and a list, and the patient understanding that numbers responded to attention. There was a knock at her door. "Come in," she said without moving. Strand opened the door. He stood in the doorframe and looked at her lying on top of the bed, staring at the ceiling. "The work is good," he said. "I know," she said. "It's thorough. It's better than thorough." He was quiet for a moment. "My legal team says they've rarely seen documentation this clean. Documentation is rarely a priority when people are all so frightened," she said, still looking at the ceiling. "I wasn't frightened. I had time to be precise." He was quiet. "I have a second proposal," he said. She looked at him. He looked back at her, steady, the way he always was. That particular stillness, the quality of a person who had calculated the odds of everything before he walked through the door. "A permanent position," he said. "Internal auditor. You'd have full access to all accounts, full authority to flag anything you found, and a salary that—" He named a number. She sat up. She looked at him for a long moment. "That's a significant number," she said. "You're a significant asset," he said, with the matter-of-fact evenness of a man quoting a market rate. She thought about Hamilton. She thought about starting over. She thought about the spreadsheet with 432 rows, and the way the numbers had looked at 11 at night across his desk, and the quality of his silences when she gave him information he'd rather not have. She thought about what it meant to be useful to someone who understood what useful looked like. "I'd want the same contract terms," she said. "My amendments, obviously. And I'd want it in writing that I report only to you. Nobody else in the organization has authority to direct my work or to restrict what I examine." A pause. "That's significant. It has to be that way for the role to mean anything." She held his gaze. "If I'm the internal check, I can't be supervised by people I might be checking. You know that." He was still for a moment. "Yes," he said. Agreed. She stood up. She smoothed the front of the shirt she'd been wearing since 3 in the morning, because she'd been up since 3 in the morning. "I want a week to think about it," she said. He blinked, only slightly, but she caught it. She suspected not many people asked him for a week. "All right," he said. "I'll send you an email," she said, "with my decision and any additional conditions." "By email," he repeated. "I prefer things in writing," she said. "You've probably noticed." He almost smiled. This one came closer than usual to actually arriving. "I've noticed," he said. She looked at him for one more moment, at the grey at his temples, at the particular tiredness around his eyes that she'd come to understand was not exhaustion but history. The weight of knowing too much about too many people for too long. She thought about Selby. She thought about 11 years. "Strand," she said. "Yes, for what it's worth." She paused. "The ones who stay the longest aren't always the ones you can trust the most. Sometimes they're just the ones who've had the most time to become something you didn't expect." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I know you know," she said. "I just thought it was worth saying out loud." She walked past him to the door. She didn't look back, but she heard him, very quietly, exhale, the sound of someone releasing something they'd been holding for a very long time. She went downstairs. Outside the window, Toronto was going about its morning, indifferent and continuous, the city doing what cities do, which is proceed. A streetcar on the road at the end of the block, a woman walking fast with coffee in her hand. October again, the leaves were down. She made herself tea. She got out her notebook. She started a new page.